Okay, so I wanted to open the discussion reading this quote. It's from one of the last pages of the Tree of Knowledge of Humberto Maturana y Francisco Varela. Every human act takes place in language. Every act in language brings forth a world created with others in the act of coexistence, which gives rise to what is human. Thus, every human act has an ethical meaning because it is an act of constitution of the human world. This linkage of human to human is, in the final analysis, the groundwork of all ethics as a reflection on the legitimacy of the presence of others. So in several of the talks and in the different interventions during these 5 days, it was discussed the relevance of recovering or somehow reestablishing this contact with our experience as a way of becoming aware of this co-constitution between ourselves and the world. Realization that has in turn an ethical consequence. And taking a look around our world and even in our discussions, it seems that for some reason this realization is not that easy. It seems that to take this statement into action or to embody this realization, we need to do some quite deep changes, to change some habits, some attitudes, and maybe even to give up certain things. So, I will stop sharing. I wanted to ask you first to all the panelists and workshop leaders, from your experience, what type of changes involved for you to adopt this embodied or an active stance in terms of maybe your scientific endeavor, but maybe also in your lives? So whoever of you would like to comment on, answer this question.
¿Podría Camila hacerla de nuevo?
Yes. So, in your experience, what type of changes are involved in adopting this embodied or an active stance or point of, I would say stance? Can be in terms of your research endeavor or, in your life, considering that it seems to be a realization that involves quite deep changes. It's not just a phrase. It remains just a phrase. We see that we carry on looking at the world in this dualistic view, me and the world. So what does it mean to understand, to deeply understand this co-constitution between me and the world? Is it clear?
It's very clear. I would just like to see other panelists say something because I've been just rambling on now. So Sabine, Michelle, Claire, Thomas, Christine, it's your turn now.
Maybe I can say something. Okay, Camila. So yes, it's right. Your question is very important. But I think that for me, it's not really the embodied approach of cognition that changed my way of seeing, but it was, I think, in tune with the very idea of co-constitution. It was a co-constitution of the embodied approach of cognition and, for instance, my approach of quantum physics. my approach of quantum physics raises many problems that I could not solve in the ordinary, distantiated dualist framework of knowledge. Even though, most scientists try desperately to make sense of the theory without really changing their own view of cognition. And so when I met Francisco, when I met his book, Embodied Cognition, I suddenly saw that, that it solved many problems, but provided I changed myself. Not only I changed my own frame of thought, not only I had to change my view of physics and my view of science in general, but I also had to change myself. So it was a sort of tangled dialectic, as Francisco Varela says, tangled dialectic between the philosophy of science, the general philosophy of knowledge, the philosophy of cognition, and my own way of being. All these things started changing together. And when they had changed together, then a completely new set of mind started to arise. But at the same time, when it started to arise, I realized that many of my colleagues could not even understand what I was saying, because I was adopting a completely different standpoint, precisely the standpoint of embodied cognition in action, co-constitution, and so on. And this framework was completely foreign to most of my colleagues. Now things have completely changed. I think mostly changed, not completely, but mostly changed. We find so many physicists who are ready to adopt this view. We find young philosophers such as, say, Sebastian, Camila, and many others who are completely, imbued with that, completely penetrated with that. So it's no longer difficult to communicate. So here is a little bit of testimony from my own career.
Thank you, Michel.
Camilla, I love your question, and I thank you for this great sort of culminating question. And the first thing that occurred to me as you said this question was that I think our first task is to fall in love with our lived experience, to fall in love with it in ways that allow us to study it. For me, for instance, I've been studying the transition between sleeping and waking. What happens as I wake up or as I go to sleep? About 10 years ago, I had a surgery, and I actually had this very vivid experience of what it was like to wake up from or come back from the surgery. And I think that these kinds of love affairs with the precise details of experience are what allow us to really come into the kinds of discussions that we're coming into at this point. And I feel this also when I work with others. I mean, I am a psychotherapist, but there's something so initially inexplicable that happens in the exchange that I have with in these sessions that we do, the kind of bodily exchanges that occur, that I still find that I need to investigate and be able to talk about more completely. To give the example of that Sebastian talked about Helen Keller, I feel that was a very important point that he made by bringing in Helen Keller, Sebastian. And I think we all have these Helen Keller moments. I think we all have access to them if we just pay attention. And so that's my short little advocacy for what we can do.
Thank you.
Or perhaps I could follow up on this nice experience that you mentioned, Christine. It's always for me a particular moment as well when waking up. I think we haven't thought about the situation of waking up enough so far. At least as much as I can say, it is it may be a wonderful experience of being given to oneself without having to do anything for it, without even being reflective of oneself. So it's not something we realize by thinking about oneself, being aware of who we are, having all this knowledge and autobiographical recollections that locate us in the world. But in the very first moment, we are just given to ourselves through our body, through our self-feeling, which is pre-reflective. I find this, having thought about, having experienced it, of course, every day, but having thought about it more and more, I find this very, very relieving, so to speak. Life is given to us and we don't have to make it somehow. And this is maybe one of the most deep, or one of the deepest motives for me to follow this phenomenology of the body and the philosophy of embodiment and inaction. It is something that can lead us into the world again from the position of an observer, which at least I have taken once I studied, once I began to study medicine. That is the position of an observer. So being outside of what you explore, being outside of what you investigate, and to gradually change this position of an observer requires you to inhabit your body first, to be because through your body you're connected with the situation and with the other, particularly in psychotherapy, of course. So it's only through the body, only through the medium of the body, then that you can gradually leave this position of the distant observer. And in this participatory experience, you feel yourself being given to yourself. So it's not something that you have to make, that you have to grasp exactly. And that is a very powerful experience, in my view, a very relieving experience as well, which is a satisfactory experience. That way, just talking about a few of the motives that I follow when I'm doing this kind of research and this kind of thinking, and also this kind of practice, because of course it needs practice. You cannot think yourself out of your body or into your body. You have to experience yourself as a bodily being, and that is a lifelong way, I think. Well, I think enough at that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
When you talk about this, you know, is very provocative what you did. The pencil is like this, but it's also a pencil like this, and it's also a pencil like this in every, yeah. That is really interesting, because how is that this myriad of different ways of different sensory stimuli become a unity. They become a unity because of your actions. The action you did make this an object, because all these different configurations came from your actions and together with them. So this is what made of these things an object. Every object that you can distinguish finally in language, it came from actions. The flow of, let's say, because words are gestures in a sense. So the flow of language, spoken language, have a sequence and a direction. And so is the flow of actions. To talk is to do something that refers to other different doings. But you have, they share the fundamental properties. You talk in a way that is directional and sequential. You act in a way that is directional and sequential. And what happens is that every moment that you act, you change yourself. So you are now in a recursive, in an inevitable recursive situation. Every time that you act upon you as soon as you act. So that is what happened in the flow of action and also what happened in the flow of language, because the flow of language is no other thing than the distinction of the states that arise in you in the flow of actions.
I'd like to say that becoming aware of the process of co-constitution of mind and body and of an inner space and outer space, interior space and exterior space, the becoming aware of this process, for me, it opened the possibility of loosening this process, of how do you say, releasing the process. And the more I become aware of the subtle acts, micro acts through which I create this separation and I rigidify this separation moment after moment, the more I become aware of this, the more I feel more free. It opens much freedom to be in that space, to explore it as a researcher and to be in it as a woman. So as far as I can, and my feeling is that we only begin to explore it. We don't know much. At least I don't know much. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Someone else want to?
Well, maybe I should. Yeah, let me try it. Well, I always felt that I could very much rely on my body, and on my experience. I don't know, when I discovered that there was a discipline that was actually dealing with this phenomenology, with the subjective experience and taking that serious, that was a revelation to me. And it gave me much more, and also, in combination with neuroscientific finding, that gave me much more confidence in trusting my gut reactions from my body in terms of, judging things. And then when I used that more, also as a, psychologist, and in my scientific existence, it helped me to, we categorize a lot and stuff, and we have to evaluate things. So it helped me with that, to be able to trust on my body and rely on my body for that. And then when I further got to know the work of Christine Caldwell, so this was pretty much, this thing was very much related to getting to know the work of Thomas as well. and also, you know, Merleau-Ponty and phenomenology. And then I got to know the work of Christine Caldwell with the moving cycle, and that helped me to learn even more, to even deeper trust, to trust the intelligence of my organism and body in an even deeper way, because we used it in a practice together. And I learned one more thing that was really important, that was to postpone meaning making. So what Thomas just said, that to rely on the sensory experience itself and to not have to judge it in every moment, but to postpone that meaning making, that really opened even another world for me. And I think through postponing meaning making in my life, I've learned so much. So I just want to thank Thomas and Christine for bringing some revelations to my life. And yeah, and I guess it was also other readings.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you. So maybe now I would like to ask a open question to all of you, so to the speakers, to the workshop leaders, but also to the audience, and has to do with this virtual interaction that we have been also just now talking about. And although it has been present from years now already, all this virtual interaction now with the pandemic has been expanded enormously, and it seems that it's something that has come to stay. It's something that is having a tremendous impact on education, in a great number of forms of working, in the psychotherapeutic context, in the ways how we create artistically or do research. So considering what we have been discussing about the relevance of claiming this place of the body and of experience, and considering also your experience of these 5 days, how do you imagine that we, a little bit this question of what is lost, what is gained, how do you imagine that this virtuality can continue to develop in a way that we could preserve some of the touchy things of the bodily contact, of the affective aspect of their, I don't know, just what is lost, what is gained, considering this experience of these 5 days of virtual conference. Yeah, Sebastian?
I would just say a few words, maybe as a beginning of the discussion. I touched upon this briefly towards the end of my talk. So for me personally, I completely understand the feeling of fear and doubt and uncertainty that is related to what we're doing now and entering into these new realms and new spheres. But on the other hand, at least for me personally, there is also a certain excitement there, because we are now witnessing, in a certain sense, this Umgestaltung that we like to talk about, but don't really want to live through. And this is precisely it. You know, a new world is being, in a certain sense, born. And it can sound dreadful because, you know, the new world order and all that. Yes, I get that. But in a certain sense, new realms of meaning are being constituted before our eyes. And the thing is, the reason why it's scary, because we really don't know where this will take us. That's the point. Usually we have this weird idea, strange idea, intellectualist idea that first there is theoretical reflection and then you have technology, then you have action. But usually it's the opposite. When something new happens, a technique takes a course and reflection follows. And this is precisely what we're afraid of now. And it's good that we're doing reflecting. It's good that we're doing reflecting, but the action is itself also very important. So for me, the overall impression is as follows. There is a certain excitement about it because we're entering the domain where the horizons are brimming with possibilities. This is, in a certain sense, and in certain areas, potentially liberating. And it's fascinating, and it's beautiful. That's one thing. Of course, it can also be negative, and these technologies can be misused, can be abused, and they will probably be misused and abused by certain centers of power. But, you know, that's the beauty of dialectic. It's like an ongoing thing. So I think that what is important is to kind of retain this spirit of adventure and be brave, even though it's scary, but also be cautious and wise about it. Reflect about what's happening, think about what's happening, and be in touch with the possibilities. Let us not close ourselves from what's happening. I mean, we can do that, but do we really want to be, I don't know what the proper English term is, but beautiful soul, it's called in Kant. That's the soul that always knows what's wrong, but never acts because it knows that whatever it will do, it will muddy itself. We have to muddy ourselves. That's the only way to live. So let us live. That's my suggestion and my thought on the matter.
Thank you. Thanks, Sebastian. Sabine?
I was so fascinated with what Sebastian said that I almost forgot what I wanted to say. I think what I wanted to say is that it was interesting how intimate it felt when we had our workshop, and how I didn't miss more embodiment than we had, you know. So that I found that very interesting, how well it works for me to get along with this new Zoom world. So I just wanted to quote again. I put the quote into the chat already because yesterday I was talking to a couple of friends about it. Friedrich Edelhäuser, he said that, you know, he's also getting along with it well. And he just said that in the end, don't we meet in consciousness? And I found that a very interesting, I mean, consciousness, that's another big concept. And what is consciousness, by the way? But I found that very interesting because it somehow, for me, it works really. And it worked in the workshop to make it, even though I had even another date or some disturbances in the workshop that came in, it worked that it was a very intimate space. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yeah, I was quite surprised about that too, how we could create this intimacy in this virtual room. Raúl?
Bueno, yo he estado muy satisfecho con esta reunión.
¿Puedes hablar un poquito más fuerte?
¿Se escucha ahí?
Muy bajito.
¿Se escucha?
Ahí sí, mejor.
Ya. No, yo he tenido una experiencia muy especial porque yo estoy en cuarentena, tuve un problema con el COVID, ya estoy rehabilitándome y en el fondo otra forma de decir de este simposio, de esta experiencia es que nos preocupamos de ver, visto de otro punto de vista, qué es la realidad, ¿ya? Cuáles son las realidades, a través de los adjetivos aquí que son el cuerpo, y la mente, y la experiencia, etc. Es como, a ver, ¿se acuerdan de Macondo como un mundo propio, un mundo cerrado, ¿no es cierto? Donde hay humanos con sus características, Macondo de García Márquez, de los que no lo conocen. Ahí se estableció un mundo cerrado, que después, desde el punto de vista literario, le han puesto una pila de nombres, pero al final son humanos los que hicieron emerger un mundo, varios mundos, varias realidades, que obviamente visto fuera de Macondo es algo raro. Nosotros hicimos esta reunión que hicimos una especie de micro Macondo, en el cual obviamente no están todos los otros pensamientos que hay en el mundo, en el universo del pensar, ¿ya? Ni el oriental tampoco. Pero no importa, igual es legítimo, y estos encuentros son para mí muy válidos, y gracias, entre comillas, a la pandemia, es que es posible este tipo de reuniones que a veces, yo creo que presencialmente a veces es más imposible todavía trabajar esta intimidad, tener la experiencia de intimidad del conversar. Por lo tanto, la virtualidad es entre comillas, ¿ya? Lo presencial depende del Macondo donde estemos, ¿ya? Lo que es importante es que me haga sentido de lo que yo estoy viendo y sintiendo. Y que hay diferentes realidades, pre, sur, que estamos compartiendo aquí, entonces quería yo exponer eso fundamentalmente.
Gracias, Raúl.
Compartir esta experiencia en la cual también aparece una ética finalmente, en una sensación de necesidad de hacerlo frente al desastre ecológico, frente al ver la angustia profunda de adolescentes, de trabajar con mucha gente sufriendo inútilmente, así como la sensación de lo inútil de un sufrimiento, que a veces el sufrimiento te permite abrir un espacio, pero es un sufrimiento que va ahogando, ¿no? De percibirlo, yo desde mi experiencia así en adolescentes, y cómo a través de moverlos van contactando sin explicación, y ahí me surge esto en esto de la ética que dice, ¿no? Esta sensación de búsqueda de un modo de vida congruente a la vida, ¿no? Y no es porque piense que vamos a saber cómo, ¿no? Pero sí creo que esto mismo de la tecnología, no sé si vieron este documental de las redes sociales, ¿ah? En que aparece una imagen que es mucho de lo que hemos estado hablando, y anoche lo pensaba, este niño que es llevado atencionalmente desde su WhatsApp, desde su Facebook, este poder que dice, que cuando lo toma el poder, pero que la imagen es un cuerpo colgado que se va vaciando, transparente, que no tiene piernas, no tiene... Y ahí la imagen de descorporalizado, ¿no? Entonces sí creo, ahí me surge en mí una sensación de que estos espacios de reflexión pueden llevar distinciones, ¿no? Para comprender este acoplamiento congruente con el gato, con el árbol, con el cuidado del gato, con esta intimidad que sentimos, y hacer un mundo desde esta intimidad, ¿no? Juntos. Así que agradezco profundamente, Camila, y a todas, Alejandra, María Isabel, todas, y vuelvo a creer que hay algo en la sensibilidad femenina, en el cuidado, en la maternidad, en este tener que mirar a un ser así que se gesta internamente. Entonces, creo que es importante, ¿no? Este movimiento que han hecho, que ayuda a llevar una ética en comunidad, ¿no?
Imani?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Firstly, I just want to share so much gratitude, much gratitude. I am a young researcher, I'm a young scientist, young artist, and I feel really supported in the quest, in the inquiry that I'm deeply kind of immersed in. And so kind of to touch on what Sabina and Sebastian were saying, it's a challenge, but at the same time, it's kind of like a privilege. It's kind of like an opportunity, a possibility really, to be able to continue the work, continue the drive for the work as well. Not just doing the work, but really being driven despite the circumstances that are being thrown at us. And yeah, feeling like, what does it mean to really be tested? What does it really mean to move through different realities? And so, yeah, I walk away from this feeling like, okay, I have collected a lot of confirmations in the work that I'm doing, but I've also added an additional layer of more inquiry, more questioning. And for me, it's so important that that happens continuously and that it happens in such a way that I feel interconnected and within a community in which I can feel supported and feel like I can reach out. Because, you know, now that I'm here, I feel like, oh, I can spontaneously email Sebastian, or I can email Christine, or I can email Arawara. Like, I can email these people, I can connect to them just because we've had this basis, we've had this touch. This virtual touch. And so, yeah, just lots of gratitude, lots of thanks, and feeling motivated. So thank you.